You're listening to the weekly parsha podcast with Ari Goldwag, recorded with Hashem's never-ending assistance in Ramah Shemesh Israel 5777, 2017. This week's parsha is Parshas Acharei Mos and Kedoshim. We have two parshas connected together. I want to remind you all about my new sefer, Perfectly Imperfect, Breaking Out of the Ordinary and Striving for Greatness. You can find it in your local Judaica store, any store that sells Feldheim books. You'll be able to find that book. Topics of personal growth ranging from ideas of self-improvement to reaching out to others, facing off with challenges, developing into a greater person, perfectly imperfect. I'd like to discuss this week's parsha. Is my bar mitzvah parsha, Parshas Acharei Mos and Parshas Kedoshim. And it's very interesting. This week's parsha, Acharei Mos, is read on Yom Kippur because it has the avoda of the Kohen Gadol. It has the special service that the high priest used to perform as he went into Lifnai V'Lifnim, into the Holy of Holies, the one time of year that it was permitted, the one man to whom it was permitted to go into that place. And that avoda is described in our parsha, and that avoda is read on Yom Kippur naturally. Now, what's very interesting and needs explanation is that we find in the parsha, besides for the aspect, the concept of the avoda, the special service of Yom Kippur, our parsha also speaks about all of the forbidden sexual relationships that Hashem has forbidden from us. A man with his sister, a man with his aunt, a father and a daughter, a brother and sister, all these forbidden relationships which create mamzerim, which create people who are called in halacha a mamzer, an illegitimate child. So all of these instances are given to us in the Torah, in our parsha, and it's interesting to me that it's given specifically in the context of the avoda of Yom Kippur. And what makes it even more difficult to understand, and more of a challenge to try to understand, is the fact that we find that on Yom Kippur itself, in the morning, when we read from the Torah, we read our parsha, we read Acharei Mos naturally, and we stop after the avoda. We don't read anything more than the actual service itself of the high priest. And that makes a lot of sense, because that's something that we describe in the Musaf prayer, and it's appropriate for the day. But now what's difficult to understand is why at Mincha time, in the afternoon of Yom Kippur, we read the next part of the parsha. We read the part that has to do with the forbidden sexual relationships. And this needs explanation. Why is it appropriate to read this on Yom Kippur, of all places, of all times? What is the depth of the message that we are supposed to take out of the parsha of these forbidden relationships? So I'd like to share with you a few different midrashim, and when we start to understand the depth of the idea behind all of them, we start to understand what's going on in our parsha, the connection between the avoda of the Beis Hamikdash, the avoda, the special service on Yom Kippur, and the aspect of the forbidden relationships. The Torah tells us in the context of these forbidden relationships, Hashem says to us, don't act K'masei Eretz Mitzrayim. Don't act the way the people of Egypt act. V'chukosem lo yiseilechu. It says, don't go in their ways, don't go in their paths. Don't act like the Egyptians. And interestingly, the verse tells us, don't behave in the way of the Canaanite nations. The place that you're going to, Hashem warns us. You came from a place which was, as Chazal referred to as Shtufei Zima. They were completely corrupt with their licentious behavior, their inappropriate sexual behavior. And you're going to a place called Eretz Canaan, the land of the Canaanites, and they too are steeped in this type of licentious behavior, inappropriate sexual behavior. Now, in speaking of the description and trying to understand this description of the Jewish people leaving Egypt, leaving that hotbed of horrible behavior, leaving that place called Mitzrayim, what is the idea? Why is it referred to these actions, these abominable behaviors, as Ma'aseh Eretz Mitzrayim, the actions or the behavior of the people of Egypt, of the land of Egypt? So the Medrash first starts off by telling us, Hadou dichsiv. This is what we find the verse says, K'shoshana ben achochim, refers to the Jewish people as a rose among thorns. Now, what is the idea of this rose among thorns? So, on first thought, the Medrash speaks about the fact that the Imois, our matriarchs, they were people who were surrounded by negative behavior, by people who were Rishayim. Rivka Imenu, Rebecca, her brother was Laban, her father was Besuel, not such good people. Even Avraham Avinu, Abraham, he came from idol worshippers. And as the Medrash continues, so it tells us that this Shoshana ben Achochim, This flower, this beautiful rose among the thorns, it's a reference to the Jewish people, the way they existed when they were in Egypt. And here's an amazing thing, and understand this well, because it seems like it's out of context. It doesn't seem so much to do with what we're speaking about. But let's see, because it does, of course. Rabbi Eliezer Pasak Begulas Mitzrayim. Rabbi Eliezer explained the verse, explained that it's talking about the redemption from Egypt. Masho Shana Zo, Kishinasuna Ben Achochim, Hikashal Baila Lalakta. When you have a rose and it's amongst the thorns, it's a great challenge for the person who owns the rose bush to get to that rose. For Hashem, it was a very challenging feat to bring the Jewish people out of Egypt. Why? Why was it so difficult? This is what we find that the verse refers to when it says in Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 34, have you ever found that God has come to take one nation out from the midst of another nation? What's the big deal? The Jewish people were separate. They were their own people. Tells us, the Medrash says it's not so simple. It wasn't so clear who is who. Elu va'elu arelim. At the time of the redemption, at the time of the Exodus, both the Egyptians and the Jewish people were not circumcised. Elu megadle bleiris ve'elu megadle bleiris. The Jewish people had adopted the non-Jewish custom to have long hair. Elu lev shekulayim ve'elu lev shekulayim. These people wore types of clothes that were forbidden, and these also did. The Jewish people, the Egyptians, they wore the same clothing. So if we would have been with strict justice, if strict justice would have had its say, the Jewish people would never have been redeemed from Egypt forever. So it was a great feat for God to separate the Jewish people out from the Egyptian people, because it was very hard to see the difference. Now, what was it? Why was it? This is essential to understand. Why was it indeed that Hashem took the Jewish people out? Amar Shmuel bar Nachmani, he says that if not for the fact that Hashem had bound himself by an oath, the Jewish people could never have been redeemed. That's why the verse tells us in Exodus chapter 6 verse 6, therefore say to the children of Israel, I am God. Meaning God is saying, by my life as it were, I have sworn, I have made this oath. Whenever you have the word lachein, therefore, it's always an oath. We find elsewhere that it uses the word v'lachein. It's in 1 Samuel chapter 3 verse 14. The word v'lachein means, and therefore means, that God is making an oath. So there's an oath here. Hashem promises that He shall redeem the Jewish people. But if not for that, if not for the oath, if not for that commitment from God, the Jewish people wouldn't have been redeemed, because there was really no difference between them and the Egyptians. Now this is a beautiful medrash, but in the context of what we're talking about here, we're talking about the illicit sexual relations, and we're referring to them as the actions of Mitzrayim. This medrash is speaking about the Exodus. It's speaking about the fact that Hashem committed Himself to take the Jewish people out. Perhaps it's even referring to the fact that the Jewish people did licentious behavior as well, like the Egyptians. But it's not so clear. It doesn't seem so connected to our context, speaking about the immoral behavior of the Egyptians. It doesn't seem to be so connected to this medrash, which speaks about that Hashem took the Jewish people out of Egypt because of His commitment to them. What is the idea? How is indeed that connected? And I'd like to read you another medrash, which actually speaks about the behavior of the Egyptians, and also speaks about the behavior of the Canaanite nations, that immoral behavior. And this piece makes a lot more sense in our context. And so it kind of strengthens my question, why did we just speak about the Exodus, and only later on do we actually speak about the connection between the behavior of the Egyptians as opposed to what God is asking of us? So here's the medrash. Amar Rabbi Rechia said, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu LeMoshe. God says to Moses, Leichem al Yisrael, go and speak to the people of Israel. When you were in Egypt, so then you were like a rose among thorns. When you go into the land of Canaan, I want you to make sure you're going to need to remain exceptional. You're going to need to remain a rose among thorns, because the nation of Canaan is also quite decadent and immoral. You need to continue that way. Make sure you focus and prevent yourselves from doing like the actions of these and the actions of these. That's why the verse says, it speaks of the way the Egyptians do it and the way the Canaanite nations do it. Rabbi Yitzchak explained this verse by giving us an analogy to someone that he has two daughters from the same mother. Both of them are from the same father. They both have a certain look. Like the verses of Necham, Kush, Mitzrayim, Put, Ukanan. The verse refers in Bereshis in Genesis chapter 10 verse 6 to the different nations that came from Cham. Amongst them were Mitzrayim, which would end up being the nation of Egypt, and amongst them was Canaan, which would end up being the nation of Canaan. Rav Chanina says, we have an analogy to a king who had an exceptional daughter, a special daughter, and he placed her into a certain alleyway. All the people in that area, in the place where he left her, were involved in licentious behavior, immoral behavior, and magic, which is forbidden by the Torah. Amar Labiti, he said to his daughter, my dear daughter, I'm putting you in this place. Of course, I have my reasons for it. I want you to be careful not to behave like these and not to behave like these. Kach, in the same way, when the Israelites were in Egypt, the Egyptians were people who were involved in immoral behavior. Shenemar, as the verse says in Ezekiel chapter 23, verse 20, it refers to them asher bisar chamarim bisaram. It refers to them as the Egyptians. The flesh of the Egyptians was like the flesh of a donkey. And the word chamor means it comes from the root of chomer, which means material. They were extremely materialistic, and we'll see soon, this is really the foundation of the idea I'd like to share with you. But they were extremely materialistic. They were involved in the material. When they came into the land of Canaan, not only were they immoral in their sexual behavior, they were also immoral insofar as their magic. They used to do magic. They used to try they had black magic, all kinds of ways of controlling nature in spite of God. Shenemar, as the verse says in Nahum chapter 3 verse 4, it refers to this idea that they had both of these aspects, the immoral behavior and being involved in black magic. So Hashem says, Bonai, my dear children, be careful not to act like these and not to act like these. That's what the verse refers to the fact that Hashem said, don't act this way that the Egyptians behave and not the way that the Canaanite nations behave. So hold on to those ideas for now, speaking about the Egyptians, speaking about the Canaanites, and speaking about the Jewish people as a rose among thorns, being extricated from there, even though it seemed like they were similar to them. Hold on to that thought for a moment, and I'd like to bring you to the next idea that I would like to share from the Medrash. It speaks about what is a person to do when it comes to immoral behavior. How is a person supposed to face off? How is a person supposed to overcome his natural desire, his urge, when it comes to this immoral behavior, which we're speaking of over here? The Medrash tells us there were three people who ran away from sin. And as a result of that, those three people, since they were faced with a challenge, they overcame that challenge. The result was that Hashem placed His name into their name. These are the three: Yosef, Yael, Upalti. Joseph, Yael, and Palti. Yosef, how do we know that this is true about Joseph? We know the story that Joseph was chased after by Potiphar's wife, and he refused, and indeed he was put in jail as a result of that. But we find that Hashem added a letter to the name of Yosef. Shenemar, as the verse says in Psalm chapter 81 verse 6, Edus bi Yehosef Samoy. There's a testimony on Yehosef. His name is not there Yosef, it's Yehosef. There's an extra hey. Mao bi Yehosef. What is the idea of Yehosef, that name? Ka meid. There's an extra letter of a hey, and thus it says there are now two letters, or really three letters of Hashem's name in Yosef's name. Yud, and then hey, and then vav. This teaches us that Hashem is testifying all of Shalei Beishas Potiphar. God is testifying that He did not touch the wife of Potiphar. He was completely innocent from any wrongdoing in that case. And the Medrash continues and speaks about Yael, and speaks about Palti. and gives us the details of what their difficulty was, their challenge was. But the idea is that as a result of them overcoming the Yetzer Hara, their evil inclination to be involved in licentious behavior, which was right in front of them, they didn't do it. The result was that Hashem put His name into their name. Now there's one more last piece which I want to share with you, also speaking about the challenge. So one idea that you see here is that when a person overcomes it, Hashem is manifest in that person in an unbelievable way. When we speak about the name of a person, when we speak about the fact that his name is changed and God's name is now in that person's name, that means that He has manifested. The name of a person expresses the essence of who he is. If Hashem has now manifested through that person as a result of his actions, as a result of his gabrus, his tremendous courage, his tremendous facing off with that Yetzer Hara, with that trouble, that challenge, so then that means that now this person is infused with godliness. So that's one thought that the Medrash gives us. But the Medrash gives us another thought, which is the core of how a person can approach and overcome the challenges that one finds himself in our times, especially in this area. I'm Rav Yossi. Rav Yossi says, there are three who their Yetzer Hara, their evil inclination, was on the edge of overcoming them. They didn't seem to have a chance. But how did they do it? How did they get rid of it? They made an oath. They swore. They made an oath, and in that way, they were able to overcome their Yetzer Hara. Yosef, David, Boaz. The three examples are Joseph, David, and Boaz. Boaz was the great-great-grandfather of David, and as we'll see, he had a great challenge. He overcame that challenge. Yosef minayin. How do we see that this is true in regards to Joseph? He said, how could I possibly do this great evil? That's what he said to Potiphar's wife. Now, what's the next part of the verse? Rav Huna b'shem Rav Idi Amar. Rav Huna, in the name of Rav Idi, says, Kluma mikra chaser v'chatasi l'Hashem. What is the end of the verse say? It should have said, and I shall sin. If I do this, I will sin to God. Ein ksikan ela lelokim. He says, I will sin to Elokim. Elokim is a different name. It's the name that represents strict judgment. And it also is a name that's used in an oath. Nishba liyitzra v'amar lelokim anichote v'niyose hara gedayla. He explains that the verse is saying to us that he swore, he made an oath to his Yetzer Hara, to his evil inclination. He said, if I do this, I will be sinning unto God, and I'm not going to do this. He was saying, there's no way that I'll do this. If I do this, there will be a sin unto God. That's the language of an oath. The Medrash goes through King David and speaks about a particular instance where he also made an oath, and it also speaks about Boaz, how Ruth was at the end of his bed. He was going to marry her anyway in the end, but still he wasn't with her. He waited until the appropriate time, etc. But we see that the idea is that one of the ways to overcome the Yetzer Hara, one of the ways to overcome the evil inclination in this area, is to make an oath, to make an absolute unbreakable commitment to God that no matter what, I'm going to stay in a pure state. Now I want to take all of the ideas that we've mentioned here and I want to draw them together with an idea from Rav Moshe Shapiro, which I'm now reading, an amazing new book that came out called Reflections and Introspection. And it's about Golus and Geula, and it's the Shiurim of Rav Moshe Shapiro translated into English. It's a beautiful book. And in the context of our very context, speaking about the Geula of Mitzrayim, speaking about the redemption, and speaking about the idea of immoral behavior, he explains an amazing idea. He doesn't explain it at length, and we're also not going to explain it at length, but get the core of it, and you can understand how to apply it. It's a beautiful idea, and it's very helpful in understanding the proper approach in this area. He explains that the Egyptians represent, the Mitzrayim represent the idea of Chomer. We mentioned this before. They represent the idea of materiality, of material existence. Now, you can take material and you can form things out of material. And the example that he gives is if you have a child, a young person who has building blocks, Legos, or whatever it is that they use. The building blocks themselves, the Legos themselves are called material. Now, when the child takes that material and he builds a little house out of it, that's called bringing it into form. So there's Chomer, material, and there's Tzura, which means form. Now a child and the Egyptian people are represented by this child. A child will take the material and they don't want to create a permanent form. They build something out of their Lego, they build this house, they like the house, they play with it for a little bit, they break it down, and then they build something else, a different type of house, or a man, or a different thing out of the Lego. So material is meant to be formed in such a way that once it's formed, that's what it is. There's a choice that's made, there's a commitment that's made within the concept of chomer, and that commitment is maintained. So once a person takes something out of material, brings it into form, that is the goal. That is what we're supposed to be doing. That is the idea of the Torah. That is the essence of who the Jewish people are. There's an aspect of commitment to form. Egyptians, on the other hand, their whole essence was chomer, material, potential, staying in the state of potential, not bringing it into, once we bring it into form, okay, so that's one thing. Now let's undo that. I'm not happy with this relationship. Let's go on to the next relationship. And then I'm not happy with this relationship. Let's move on to the next relationship. There's never a true commitment. And that's the immoral behavior of the Egyptians. And that is really the idea behind the Western society, the way the Western civilization today thinks about relationships. It's like we'll be committed to a certain extent. It doesn't work out, move on to the next one. That's why the divorce rate is so high. There's a lack of true commitment. There's a lack of true commitment to bringing something from the material into form. And that's also why in the Western world there aren't many children being made. Because it's not about bringing into form. The Jewish people are told, Hashem guides us through the Exodus. Hashem takes us out of the material and He brings us into form. He brings us to a place where we can come now, and through commitment, we take that material, we bring it to form. The Jewish people are instructed to be committed, one relationship, one wife, all of our lives. Complete that. All that we can do, complete that. And into old age, there's always that continued commitment to that same person. It doesn't change. It's not a flight of fancy. But now that we understand this idea, let's see something amazing. Because now we can really understand the depth of what this has to do with Yom Kippur. What is the idea of immoral behavior? Why is that right here in the middle of Yom Kippur? And the clear answer, so clear, is that Hashem is committed to the Jewish people. Hashem makes an oath. The Jewish people are completely material. But Hashem says, right here where you're so material, you're so mixed up with the Egyptians, I made an oath. I made a commitment to you, the Jewish people, to your great-grandparents, because of their commitment to me. And even though you have lost your commitment, I maintain my commitment. And I'm going to help you to be able to restore that commitment by giving you the Torah. So it's not a different topic when we speak about the Exodus, and we speak about the commitment Hashem made, the oath that He made. There was an oath God made, just like in a parallel way to the way that Yosef makes an oath, and David makes an oath, and Boaz makes an oath. There's that commitment. I will not use my material, my potential, I will not use it in a way which is just letting it be lost, letting it be nitpazer, spread out. No, it will be focused. It will be used in a way which creates form, which develops a relationship, which creates more children in the world, and with someone with whom it's appropriate to create that relationship. So in this context, in the same context which speaks about the idea of Yom Kippur, what is the idea of Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is, Hashem says, I'm committed to you, and you must remain committed to me. There's a day of atonement where we recognize and we look at all of the mistakes that we made, and Hashem says, I promise you, all you need to do is come back to me. I forgive you. Our relationship is holy. Our relationship is inviolate. You can't break it. Right here, the Kohen Gadol going into Lifnei V'Lifnim, the high priest going into the Holy of Holies, represents the fact that the Jewish people will always get their atonement. They will always have that relationship with God, no matter what, come what may, as far as they might stray from Hashem. Hashem says, I am always committed to you. You are the material, and I am committed to always make sure that the form is going to come through you. Just like a person who's truly committed to his wife focuses there on his wife, focuses on the chomer, on the material that he has chosen to work with, so to speak. And vice versa. We're not just speaking about a man and his wife, we're speaking about the wife with her husband as well. This is not a one-sided relationship. Each one acts in a male-female way. Sometimes the female acts in a male way. Sometimes the male acts in a female way, etc. This is all about the relationships. It's not speaking specifically about man versus woman. But now we understand why on Yom Kippur we read the avodah, we read about our atonement, and we also read about why we have the ability to atone. It's because there's a commitment between us, our commitment to God, and Hashem's commitment to us, that we, the Jewish people, are His wife, so to speak. We are the material that He wishes to form, and that commitment is forever. And in that same context, we need to know that we need to emulate Hashem in that way, and we need to be committed to our relationships. We need to be committed in this way, and the way to commitment is recognizing that Hashem manifests in this way into us, in our names, when we have that commitment. And the examples of Yosef and David and Boaz, how they made that commitment strong in front of their eyes through an oath in order to maintain the commitment. And I want to bless you, and I ask you to please bless me. Hashem should help us, that we should be able to recognize the amazing idea of the chomer, the material, what it means. Hashem should help us to be able to leave, to have our own personal exodus from the civilization within which we live, that is only interested in maintaining potential. So many possibilities is what they want. Hashem should help us to recognize that the true goal is to limit the possibilities, to choose, to bring material into form. Hashem should help us be able to have that commitment in this area, have that commitment in our relationship with Hashem. And may Hashem always help us to do tshuva and to come back to Him and return back to our commitments and come back lifnai v'lifnim to the Holy of Holies, into that relationship with Hashem. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful Shabbos. This podcast was made possible through the gracious donations of listeners like you. For more podcasts like this, please visit www.arigoldwag.com or search on iTunes Ari Goldwag.